Hello and welcome back to my studio. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and today's another studio vlog where I'm going to be sharing another one of my practice sessions where I just play around with a limited palette and using the back of an old painting, so there's no pressure to perform or produce a finished painting. It's just a lot of fun to experiment and play. Those of you that have been here for a while will know that I like to do these kinds of abstract experimental paintings where I just put paint onto the page and see what happens, see what I can make out of it. So it's a kind of a spontaneous painting. And I'm pretty sure that some people see these sorts of experiments possibly as a waste of time, but actually this is where the magic lies. This is where you make the discoveries when you experiment like this without any pressure. You find things that you can take into your paintings that are unique to you, and you can move forward with those things and progress with your watercolour painting. So today my limited palette is yellow ochre, sepia, Payne's grey and indigo. I've got some salt in case I want to sprinkle a little bit of salt into the wet paint to create some little frost blooms or flowers or sort of fern patterns. I've picked out 3 brushes to use. I may grab some more if I need them, but I think I'll be fine with my 1.5 inch Princeton Neptune Mottler and an Escoda round, a size 14. I've also got a small calligraphy brush and of course my trusty palette knife, because I love to use that to sort of scrape through the paint and to create interesting marks in my abstract landscapes. And I'll be mixing it all in this large enamel tray. My paper today, it's the back of the paper as I said before, is Milford cold press watercolour paper. It's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape, and my board's at an angle of about 20 to 30 degrees. I'm painting the sky with clean water because I'm going to be painting this wet in wet, and then I'll just make a few random sort of marks across the landscape area, leaving some dry patches. This means when I apply the paint will behave differently on the wet page to the way it behaves on the dry parts of the paper, and hopefully it's that will start to give me some really nice effects. So I'm going to go for one of my favourite colours of sky for these atmospheric experiments, and that's yellow ochre. So I'm just using my large wash brush with big, simple, clean, horizontal brush strokes backwards and forwards to create a graduated wash that's a little bit stronger at the top, and the paint runs out and gets paler towards the horizon. And then dipping into all 3 of my dark colours, which is sepia, indigo and Payne's grey, just having them all on the brush, not mixing in the palette, allowing them to colour mix on the page. You can see where the paint is resisting the dry parts of the paper and flowing into and softly diffusing on the wet parts of the page. And I'm already seeing a tree line appearing, so I'm going to just make a few marks that continue to enhance that idea. And just using mostly horizontal or slightly sloping brushwork to put in the land. And hopefully this will just give me the suggestion of some sort of a landscape. And this is really good practice for painting loosely, so that you paint suggested elements rather than adding too much fussy detail. I like the way it looks at the moment, so I'm going to lay my board flat so that the paint doesn't run down the page anymore. And I'm just looking at it carefully to see what I can make the most of, which marks I like. And I love this tree here. I love where the water has sort of crept into the outline and given it that lovely edge. So I think that's going to be my focus. I'll allow it to dry a little bit more, and then I'll probably add some branches and trunks to that area and some of the other marks so that they look more like trees. But the first thing I'm going to do is just add a little bit more texture by scraping through that paint in a shallow diagonal and a few other marks with my palette knife, spreading the paint around as you do with a palette knife, and sort of creating these very different marks from the kind of marks that I can make with paintbrushes. And then back to the brushes as well, smoothing in a little bit more paint. Maybe increasing that suggestion of a horizon line. But I don't want to add too much. I want to keep this fresh and light. It's an experiment, but it's also an experiment in not just limiting tools and a limited palette, but in sort of limiting the amount of brush strokes that I put in. I'm just putting a bit of yellow ochre into the land, and I think that helps to sort of balance that out a little bit more. I'm now going to use my fine ground ordinary table salt, and I'm going to sprinkle just a few grains here and there across the damp paint in the foreground, maybe a bit in the midground. Each grain should just push the paint away a bit, creating little sort of fern patterns, flowers, whatever suggestions, whatever you want them to be really. And I usually like them to suggest a foreground for me without me having to actually paint it. And I'm just looking at that focal point tree, and I can see that the paint is still damp, and so I've got time to scrape through the damp paint, as you can see, with the tip of my palette knife to add these little tree trunks, a few branches, not too much, but just enough to cement the illusion that I'm creating of an abstract landscape with a tree line. So these I sort of see them as being hawthorn, blackthorn trees, that sort of thing. Trying to pull some of the marks outside of the margins of the paint marks, keeping those lines really fine. Then I can pull a few similarly oriented marks through this lower bush here, and I'm hoping that this creates the suggestion of this tree line and landscape that I want it to. And I think that's as much as I want to do, so I'm going to leave it to dry completely, then have a look and see how it looks. And while it's drying, just a quick chance for me to plug my new book, Landscapes in Watercolour, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner. It's now available to purchase from all good bookstores, and I'll leave a couple of Amazon links in the description below. So here's the dry painting so far. I'm liking the look of it. I'm going to use a dry, clean brush to brush off any remaining salt, but I think nearly all of it has been dissolved by the paint. Bear in mind, if you use salt, it's not considered archival, but I really don't mind when I'm playing around and having these sorts of experiments. I pretty much like it as it is. I don't think it needs anything else, so I'm going to remove the tape and have a look. Removing the tape, seeing it with a clean white border helps us to kind of see it with fresh eyes, if you see what I mean. And we can often see that way whether it needs anything else doing to it, whether it's balanced or whether it needs any additions. And while you could add figures, you could add birds, you could add fences, maybe a little cottage in the distance, I really like it the way it is, just very simple, a less is more painting, and a lot of fun to kind of create it out of nothing. The tree patterns, as you can see, and the mark making there is really interesting, and I think it works really nicely. As is the salt. It's quite a subtle effect that I got today, but it's just enough to give me the effects that I'm looking for in my very simple foreground that just really works to lead the viewer into the painting, to the tree line. So I hope you found that helpful, and that maybe you'll try experimenting with your favourite colours and see what happens when you play around like this, trying to create just an interesting and spontaneous abstract landscape. It's a great way to warm up before you do a more planned painting, and of course you can use the back of old paintings for it, so it's a good economical thing to do as well. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Please leave us a like and maybe consider subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. And thank you so much to everybody that supports us and the channel on Patreon. We really do appreciate you. I'll see you again soon. Take care and happy painting. Bye.